All right, for chapter 7, we're going to be looking at the last of the macronutrients, proteins. Chapter 8 will move into looking at vitamins, and then chapter 9 kind of takes a look at minerals and water as nutrients. And so, chapter 7, proteins. Of course, you can see the big picture there of that looks like a T-bone steak. Of course, that's animal protein. There's other ways to get protein if you are more vegetarian, and we'll talk about some vegetarian options as well. But so we're going to look at proteins. Of course, this first part of the video, we need to kind of understand what proteins are. Why are they important? What kind of uses you have for proteins in the body? How does the body use proteins? A little bit about the biochemistry. And so let's kind of get started here. So one of the things kind of first to make note of about their chemistry is they're made up of units called amino acids. And many of you have had some kind of background in science or biology. I'm sure you've seen amino acids before. Those are the basic building blocks to make a protein. And we'll talk a little bit about some amino acids. I want to show you the structure of them. But basically, they're made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, just like the other types of macromolecules. They also have nitrogen there, and sometimes you'll see proteins have some amino acids have sulfur added to it as well. So one thing about proteins in the body anyway is that they do a lot of different things. And so I've just given you a couple of little things to think about here. Proteins can be categorized as structural proteins. So things in the body like your bone tissue or the structural part, your collagen that you have in the body is protein, and you find collagen in your organs, and it's connective tissue in the body, or also the keratin type of structural protein that you find in your hair and your nails. And so you find this structural type protein pretty much all places in the body, really. Contractile, that means it contracts, and so of course we think of muscles as being protein. That's probably where we first think of protein use in the body. And of course you have three main types of muscles in the body: your cardiac muscle in the heart, smooth muscles that you find in your organs, and your hollow type organs and blood vessels and things. And then also your skeletal muscles that you find attached to the skeleton itself. You have proteins that are in the blood. I listed blood clotting proteins, but you also have things like albumins and globulins, your immunoglobulins, your antibodies are proteins, transport proteins. We'll mention a couple things about transport proteins. Actually saw a little bit about those as far as LDL and HDL. Technically, those are transport type proteins because they are transporting cholesterol in the body, in the bloodstream. You could also think about proteins that work as transporters across cell membranes. Those are proteins. And so lots of different uses. You could add to this list, or at least a function of proteins, energy, because you can produce some energy from proteins. You can break down proteins and form the ATP energy there. And so we'll look at some of these as we go through. Well, here's kind of a list then of some of those specific examples. And we've mentioned a lot of these already: structural proteins, the collagen and keratin. Hormones, some of your hormones are protein-based, amino acid-based. Insulin and glucagon, both of these come from the pancreas, produced and secreted from the pancreas. Both of these help to balance your blood glucose levels. And so these are protein structured hormones. Not all of your hormones are proteins. But these are, many of them are steroid based. We mentioned the antibodies, the immunoglobulins that you find in the blood. They help to maintain proper pH balance. They work as buffers, really, in the body, and they do that by, just like any kind of buffer in chemistry, by basically balancing the hydrogen ions. And of course, hydrogen ions determine the pH of the solution that you're looking at. So let's look at amino acids briefly. We mentioned already that they're basically the building blocks of protein. We have about 20 amino acids, different amino acids that get put together through the process of protein synthesis um, to form all the different proteins that we have in the body. And so you don't necessarily need to know all the biochemistry for an exam purpose, but here's a couple of things about it. We know it is an organic molecule. Here's our carbon molecule here. Every amino acid is going to have an amino group, that's why it's called an amino acid. It has an amino group and it has an acid group. And then you'll have what's called, then you'll have like one covalently bonded hydrogen, and then you have what's called an R group. That's like a variable group. In other words, this is what changes between those 20 different amino acids. Right, so the amino group stays the same. That's the nitrogen containing part of the group. You've got the acid part of the group is here. The hydrogen stays the same, but the R group changes depending on which different amino acid you're looking at. So you look at glycine or methionine or leucine, whichever amino acid you're looking at has a different R group. By the way, this is why these work well as buffers, is because they have a weak base. The amino group serves as a weak base and can and the acid group here is like a weak acid, and so it helps to buffer your body's pH, which is very important. Couple things. Make sure you know these terms: essential versus non-essential amino acids. We've talked about this word here, essential, before. Essential means that it has to be supplied by the diet. It's essential to be supplied in the diet. You have to eat it, ingest it in some form. Either from plant source, animal source, supplement source, whatever that source is. In other words, the body doesn't produce all of the amino acids that we need. 9 of the 20 are essential amino acids. We have to eat foods that contain 9 out of the 20. The other 11, pretty much your body can produce. As long as you're a healthy individual, the body can pretty much produce the other 11 amino acids. So those are non-essential. And again, be careful of the words. Non-essential doesn't mean that you don't need them. That's what we normally think of when we see that word. It's not that we don't need them. It's just that we don't necessarily have to eat them because our body has the the machinery, the mechanism there's there to the biochemistry and the everything there to produce those for us. So where does these protein sources come from? One thing to kind of think about is when you eat foods, even if they're high in protein, no naturally occurring food is just complete protein. In other words, it's going to have other things with it. It's going to have fats, it's going to have carbohydrates, it's going to have vitamins, it's going to have minerals. And so nothing is 100% pure protein, naturally occurring food. And so generally you find that animal sources, meats, are going to have a higher concentration of protein. They're probably going to have more amino acids than just plant-based foods. And so you do need to make sure, if you are vegetarian, you do need to make sure that you are complementing, making sure that you are getting the correct amount of protein, that you're getting the correct amount of those, especially those essential amino acids. And and we'll kind of talk about how complementary plant-based foods go together, right? So things like beans and rice, people, civilizations have been putting together beans and rice for millennia, and it's because they complement each other. Beans they're not a perfect source of protein. They're not a complete source of protein. Neither is rice, but when you put those together, you basically they complement each other so that you have all of those essential amino acids accounted for. Other good sources of proteins based on like the protein density would be seeds, nuts, beans, legumes. They generally have higher amount of protein per serving than just fruits and vegetables alone. Now, I kind of mentioned these words on that last slide, but here it is on the notes: high quality complete protein. Usually we refer to these protein sources here as complete proteins, although you're starting to see this terminology used a lot in nutrition, high quality instead of complete. Either one is still used, but if it's a complete protein, it basically includes all of those 9 essential amino acids that we mentioned. 9 essential amino acids that your body doesn't naturally produce, that you have to have in your diet, which is good to know. You know, I want a complete protein to make sure I'm covered by getting all of these essential amino acids. If that food source doesn't have all 9 essential amino acids, maybe it's lacking 1 or more, then it's incomplete. Sometimes you'll see this referred to as low quality. Probably, I don't think it's the best description there, because there's nothing wrong with that particular protein. It's not complete. It doesn't have all of those essential amino acids in there. And so generally, again, plant sources don't have, would usually fall into the category as being incomplete. They don't have, they have amino acids, they have many amino acids. They may not have all of the 9 essential amino acids together. So you would just need to make sure, you get a variety of plant sources as far as your protein goes. All right. What our body does with these proteins, let's say, we're going to have a meal that has protein as part of it, as part of the food source, and we're going to digest those down into amino acids. Well, now our body needs to take those amino acids that we've digested and assemble the proteins that we need, and we have to be able to take those amino acids, put those together in the correct order to make the protein that forms collagen, or the protein that forms insulin, or the protein that forms the antibodies in our blood. The amino acids, have to go to, if you think about the cell biology, this is called protein synthesis, or the process of translation, if you want to think about it in terms of that. This is taking place at the ribosomes inside the cell. Those amino acids are linked together with a type of covalent bond called a peptide bond. That's what's holding these amino acids together. So when you digest proteins, this is the bond that you would have to break. You would have to have an enzyme there to break that peptide bond. And we'll talk about the digestion in a little bit. If you see the word polypeptide, then that just means you got at least two, or usually more amino acids, putting those together into a chain. If you just got a couple of amino acids put together into small chains, then that's referred to as peptides. All right, you may have heard of this term, protein denaturation. It's kind of a chemistry type term, or you may have seen it in bio class as well. Proteins have to have a particular shape in order to function, and they get this process by going through the endoplasmic reticulum, if you want to think of the cell parts there inside the actual cell. And if anything causes them to lose or to kind of alter that particular shape, then they actually start losing their function. They may no longer work. And so this slide is just kind of telling us a few things that could cause a protein to actually stop working, lose its shape. Proteins are pretty sensitive, and so it doesn't matter which kind of protein you're looking at, really. Pretty sensitive to different things. I forgot to mention earlier that enzymes in the body, these are usually proteins as well. And so kind of think about how our enzymes work to speed up reactions inside of our body. But take a look at these things. Heat, usually proteins are pretty sensitive to temperature. And so if the heat changes too much, that actually causes the protein to lose its shape. Now, in our body, if we think of the human body, that's why having a fever can be such a problem. If our body temperature rises too much, then it can actually cause some problems with some of the protein enzymes that we have. Nutritionally, thinking about foods or whatever, when you cook eggs and they change forms, you're basically denaturing the protein. Heat is causing them to denature the protein. You could acids, certain acids causes proteins to denature. And so if you add lemon juice to milk, it's going to cause it to curdle or kind of thicken up, and that'll basically is causing those casein proteins in the milk to actually denature. Hydrochloric acid that we naturally have in our stomach, that's helping to digest proteins by kind of changing their shape a little bit inside of the stomach. And then, of course, you have enzymes there to help chemically break those peptide bonds, or even physical agitation. That's kind of adding energy to those proteins, and that also starts denaturing protein. So if you've ever beat an egg or whipped an egg to create egg whites, you're basically denaturing proteins. All right, if you think about protein digestion, the chemical part of digestion begins in the stomach, even though you got a little, physical, mechanical digestion by chewing up the food in the mouth. The actual chemical process of digestion takes place in the stomach, and that's because you got, the hydrochloric acid there that's denaturing the proteins. You've got a particular enzyme known as pepsin. This enzyme here works well at a low pH and actually requires hydrochloric acid in order to work correctly or most efficiently. And so the pepsin actually breaks the proteins down by breaking those peptide bonds. Those small chains of amino acids, those polypeptides, they go into the intestines. You have other enzymes there in a more neutral pH or closer to neutral pH, balanced pH in the intestines. And you have some other enzymes here, trypsin and chymotrypsin. These are continually breaking those polypeptides down into smaller and smaller units down to those amino acids. And these enzymes here are coming from the pancreas. Once you have those broken down, then absorption is taking place in the small intestines. Amino acids are generally taken to the liver, where they're going to start kind of being reassembled and kind of sent where they need to go as far as protein synthesis goes. Now, one concept kind of think about is, what's known as protein turnover, because we're always taking in amino acids and proteins. We're always building these up. We're getting rid of some. One thing to kind of mention here is that we really don't store up a lot of extra amino acids. So once you have these amino acids in their, in this form, amino acid form, you're not really storing up. You don't have special cells like you have, the adipose cells or the adipocytes storing up lipids. You don't have specialized cells storing up amino acids. And so you're kind of using those as you have them brought in, ingested, digested, and absorbed. And so they're always being kind of recycled. And so this kind of schematic here is showing you, you're getting that amino acid here, you're breaking it down. Some of the amino group here in the liver is going to be processed. That nitrogen part of that group is a waste product. It forms ammonia, which is toxic to your cells, and so you need to get rid of the ammonia. So one of the things the liver does is to convert that ammonia into urea. A little safer to travel through the bloodstream in that form. That's going to be filtered out by the kidneys. But the other portion of this, what they call the carbon skeleton, the other portion of the amino acid group can be converted into glucose. It can be converted into fatty acids. It can be used as the other amino acids, the non-essential amino acids, those that you actually are producing in the body. It can actually be converted into energy. So you've got lots of forms of nutrition that are coming out of these amino acids here. So what that means is you're creating kind of a nitrogen balance. Your body's always, gaining proteins, and it's always getting rid of the proteins as well, or the nitrogen that's there. And so, the idea is to try to have an equal kind of an equilibrium established, so that the amount of protein and nitrogen that you're taking in kind of balances what you're losing, what the nitrogen loss is. There are times when our body actually has kind of a positive nitrogen balance. In other words, we're actually taking in more and using more in the body, and losing less. So periods where we're growing. And so you kind of think of different age groups, early childhood or adolescents that are that are growing a little quicker and going through growth spurts, they're going to be using up more protein to build up things like collagen and bones and muscles. Individuals that are pregnant, they're using up a lot of resources during that pregnancy period. Perhaps when you're recovering from some kind of illness or injury, your body's replacing some collagen fibers, or you got antibody production on the increase. So all these are examples of when you would have higher amounts of protein turnover and taking in more, holding on to more resources. Exercise, resistance exercise. That's another good example. Your muscle building with strength training type exercises. When you're on the opposite extreme, negative nitrogen balance, you're not taking in enough protein to kind of balance what you're losing. And so this is where you don't want to be, because usually this is because you're not taking in enough. Maybe you're malnourished, you're not taking in enough protein for whatever reason. Perhaps you have some kind of GI tract problem that's not absorbing. Maybe you're eating the protein, but you're not absorbing it. Or you have some other underlying condition that's causing you not to be able to absorb the protein as well. Or maybe you have just a chronic condition that you have to be on bed rest, or other problems. Could be a kidney problem because the kidneys are trying to absorb or reabsorb our nutrients. You don't want to waste these nutrients that you spent time eating and digesting and absorbing to the bloodstream, and so you need your kidneys to kind of make sure they're not losing protein through the kidneys, through the urine. So last couple of things in this video, we'll look at how much protein do you need. That's a good question. Most of the time we don't really think about measuring how much daily protein that we're getting. Of course, there are guidelines that we'll look at, the daily protein requirement for healthy adults, and this is the estimated average recommendation. If you remember back from chapter 3, this is kind of looking at the about what would satisfy about half the population. Is about 0.66 grams per kilogram of body weight of protein. What they recommend as far as that will satisfy, if this is like 95 to 98% of the population, if they got 0.8, then that would satisfy the requirements for just about everybody in the population, is about 0.8. So that's kind of the number there to note: 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And we kind of mentioned already that there are times in our lives that we may need more protein than others during experience of growth or pregnancy, lactation, recovery from illness, or like athletes. Athletes, are constantly needing more protein to kind of satisfy their athletic abilities, right? And they're using the muscles and building muscles. And so one thing to kind of look at is how to calculate this based on your body weight, and you can do this at home. You need to know your body weight in kilograms, and not everybody knows that. And so one first thing to do, I've given you just a little example from the book there. So the question is, what is the recommended dietary allowance for protein if the person weighs 165 pounds, right? And so given that the RDA is 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram, the first thing you need to do is basically just convert the weight, whether you're doing it for you or you're doing it for this question here, the weight of the individual. This is in pounds, convert it to kilograms. To one easy way to do that, divide it by 2.2. When you divide your weight in pounds divided by 2.2, then you have your weight in kilograms. Okay, and so for this example, 165 divided by 2.2 is 75 kilograms. Now that you have that, all you have to do is take 75 kilograms, multiply that by the RDA number up there, 0.8, and that's so 75 kilograms multiplied by 0.8 grams of proteins. That cancels out the kilogram factor there, and then that leaves you with 60 grams of protein per day. So what that means is the individual, assuming that they're a healthy individual, they weigh approximately 165 pounds, or 75 kilograms, would need to eat, recommended to eat, about 60 grams of protein per day. All right. Then the question becomes, well, what does that look like? How much is 60 grams of protein per day? And of course, you could look at some kind of dietary table and see how much protein, is in a particular meal. You could use the nutrition calculator programs. There's, we use one in Connect. There's others. You can go to myplate.gov and use theirs. You can kind of find out how much protein is in the foods that we eat. I just found this. This is just an example meal. There's, whatever examples you want to look at. 60 grams of protein in one particular meal that I found, 2 eggs. You drink a glass of milk. You eat about a 3-ounce portion of meat or fish. Have a cup of cottage cheese. That's going to have about 60 grams of protein, and that satisfies what you need on a daily basis. So really not a lot, based on, one meal can basically get your required amount of that 0.8. All right, thanks guys. On the next video, we'll continue the discussion of proteins and kind of look at other ways that they impact our overall health and nutrition.